The big question is, should we build machines that are conscious? And the hypothesis that we're asking ourselves is, would a conscious superintelligence be safer for humanity than a zombie superintelligence?
Hi, I'm Cindy Housen, host of The Data Chief. If you've heard me talk about data and AI before, you know that I believe everyone, not just data teams, should be able to get the insights they trust. That's why I'm proud to say that ThoughtSpot sponsors this podcast. ThoughtSpot's agentic analytics platform lets you simply ask a question in natural language and get clear, governed answers right when you need them. No fuss, no waiting. It's why companies like Cisco, Lyft, Hyatt, and Roche count on ThoughtSpot. See what the future of analytics feels like at thoughtspot.com. Welcome to The Data Chief. I'm your host, Cindy Housen. Today, we're joined by Daniel Humm, Chief AI Officer at WPP and CEO of Satalia, an award-winning AI company that WPP recently acquired. Daniel is also the founder and CEO of Consortium, the world's first commercial research organization focused on understanding machine consciousness. I can't wait to dig in to see what he means by that. Is it real? Do machines have a conscience? I don't know. Let's see. But Daniel has spent more than 2 decades working across academia, startups, global enterprises, helping organizations understand what AI really is about and how to use it effectively. We'll talk about how AI agents are changing business decision-making and how leaders can move past the hype and how AI can or should augment rather than replace human creativity. Daniel, welcome to The Data Chief.
Thanks, Cindy. It's great to be here.
Yeah. And where in the world is here today, Daniel?
It's usually on an airplane or in an airport lounge, but today I'm at home in London.
Oh, very nice. I suspect we'll meet in one of these airport lounges. Now, Daniel, you have founded and scaled multiple AI organizations, startups, and worked across enterprises. How did you get into this space?
My undergraduate 25 years ago was in AI at UCL, a university here in London. There were 2 people on my course. But I guess when you're curious about what it means to be human, what's intelligence, can you build intelligent machines, can you build machines that are conscious? When you start to ask these questions, you can't help but get involved in the world of AI. So I started very early and I've been passionate about the subject ever since.
You have started early. I've started a little earlier than you in the data space, and it always makes me laugh when somebody tells me, oh, a degree in data science is required or a degree in AI is required. I'm like, these degrees did not exist 35 years ago. You also have a very interesting role, an entrepreneur in residence at University of College of London. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, my entire academic career has been at UCL, where I did my undergraduate in AI, my master's in AI agents. That was 23 years ago. I did my PhD at UCL, where I was modeling bumblebee brains, so neural networks back in the day. I ran a master's program actually in applied AI at UCL for many years, 5 years, where I had 100 of students going out there applying these technologies. So I've got a very good sense about how organizations have adopted and embraced AI technologies over the past few decades. And I am now entrepreneur in residence at UCL. So I help them navigate, spin out deep tech companies. That keeps me honest. It keeps me close to the bleeding edge.
Yeah, it's an interesting cross-section of academia where sometimes I think they think big and you have time to do the research. And then startups who think anything is possible. And then enterprises like at WPP that really have to make it work. How do you balance this cross-functional view?
Yeah, when I advise startups or academics that are wanting to kind of get into this world, I often say to them, there's a really big difference between research and technology. So getting research to the point where it's a technology that's working is a big step. And there's an even bigger step from research technology to business. And I think often people don't appreciate kind of the leaps that you need to make, the skills that you need to be able to translate all of that cool stuff that's happening in academia to actually creating impact in the world. In fact, the company that I started, Satalia, 18 years ago, the idea was to provide AI as a service. The idea was that all these incredible algorithms that are being developed in academia, but they very, very rarely reach the light of day. So could you create a service where companies could send questions or problems to a machine, and it would then identify the right algorithms to then solve that problem, giving academics the ability to commercialize their IP. Arguably, that was very early, 20 years ago. I think it's still early now.
Yeah, it reminds me of a research note I had the opportunity to collaborate on probably 10 years ago at Gartner, and it was the concept of algorithmic marketplaces. But maybe we could say, when you think about the way AI agents are being decoupled and the interoperability that things like MCP and A2A bring, maybe we're getting there. Somebody could imagine, I want an AI agent from company A, another agent from company B, and they're all safely, ethically communicating. What do you think?
Yeah, well, so it's a great big topic, actually. So whilst my day job in WPP is to build AI that helps them differentiate their supply chain, so essentially marketing. So we've identified essentially 7 core problems across marketing that you can apply AI to. Now, some of that's agents, some of it's not agents. My primary goal this year is to agentify this organization, and actually, not many people are aware of this, but sort of 80% of the effort, the cost in deploying software is testing. And of course, what we're going to do is enable people, organizations to deploy arguably an army of intoxicated graduates. That's how I think about agents, intoxicated graduates across their organization. And the reality is that those agents will go wrong. They're not necessarily fit for purpose, et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be much more emphasis over the next year or so on governance, on making sure that they are capable of doing that job. And so you've already alluded to this, but I span out a company from WPP primarily to solve machine consciousness. But the first product that company is launching very soon actually is called Verify AX. It's verifying that agents actually have the capability that they claim that they have. So if you built an agent that can do project management, if you asked it, can you manipulate a Gantt chart? The reality is the agent will probably say yes, but you need to test it because it might not be able to do that. So how can you simulate agents in real world scenarios to test and make sure that they actually can do the job that they claim that they can do? Because the reality is that these things are a little bit like intoxicated graduates. And even as they get smarter and become more human and more expert-like, even experts can't solve certain types of problems. You need to rely on other algorithms. So agents are going to be an interface, an interactive interface that are going to be solving problems, but they'll still need to be able to utilize other types of algorithms to be able to solve that problem, like machine learning and optimization.
So there's a lot to unpack there, Daniel. So let's go back. First off, WPP, for those who are not familiar with the company, we could maybe describe it as the world's largest marketing organization. But tell our listeners a little bit more about WPP.
Yeah, so WPP is about 100,000 people. We create, I think, a quarter of the world's ads. And of course, there are some industries that are relatively immune to AI, or at least generative AI. Generative AI is very good at creating content. It's not necessarily good at making predictions yet, and it's definitely not good at making complex decisions. But in an industry where it used to take months to create production-grade content, and that's now been reduced down to seconds, in an industry where understanding how people perceive things is important, where historically you had to have focus groups, and now you can actually get AIs to simulate focus groups, it's completely transforming that industry. So I'm very excited actually being part of an industry where AI is being incredibly disruptive. So again, my job is to make sure that AI is being used across our supply chain to make sure that we can do, dynamic segment identification, content creation, audience perception, media optimization, I don't know, creativity. We can talk about creativity later. It's really an exciting topic that we're focusing on. But from an agentic perspective, we've taken a dual strategy. One is, how do we enable our employees to use these technologies at the edge to deploy agents in a safe and responsible way, and allow them to figure out how to, make their jobs more effective, more efficient. But also, we appreciate that building some agents requires deep technical expertise, access to complex data sources. They need to be super secure, tested, etc. So we have an entity, my original company, Satalia, inside WPP, who essentially build super agents. And we know that building super agents is hard, hence why we've got this separate company called Consium to try to then do agent verification. So that dual strategy, I think, is a really good approach. We often are starting to hear this term shadow AI, which are people using these technologies and organizations not necessarily knowing what they're being used for. We really leaned into that several years ago once AI was created to enable people to use these technologies safely and responsibly.
So you leaned into using shadow AI. You said different departments have at it, use what you want.
Exactly. And the goal there was to make sure that there was a single portal, we call it WPP Open, that people can utilize the different types of models to be able to solve their different problems. And, the reality is that shadow AI are people using AI, using their own credit card, potentially putting in, company data, all that kind of stuff. And so getting our arms around that very, very quickly, particularly because WPP is one of the power users of AI. I think we're one of the biggest users of generative AI globally. So getting our arms around that, ensuring that people are using it safely and responsibly, but also empowering them to agentify their own work has been a real priority.
Yeah, so it gives them the autonomy to run fast, to experiment fast, while still protecting customer data and having the guardrails. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And going back to this idea that AIs are a little bit like intoxicated graduates, we have a methodology to identify, what people are deploying AI to, and then saying, look, actually, it's probably not going to be fit for purpose. It's probably not going to be work. We need to think about this more carefully. But again, what we didn't want to do is stop people from using these technologies, particularly because it's so transformational.
And you also referred to your role is to agentify WPP and the work processes, and it is transformational. One comment that many leaders have made to me is that there's friction between wanting to just apply AI tactically to an existing process rather than reimagining. So if I take WPP's one of the greatest campaigns that one of the agencies in the family created, Nationwide is on your side. It's a tagline that stays. There's so many commercials. If you think about that whole creative process from concept to the actual campaign, maybe in the Super Bowl or something like that, how do you work with leaders to approach it so that it is transformational rather than just automating a task that maybe should go away?
Well, my job in some respects is to solve end-to-end marketing. The idea is, you put money in here and out pops more money. But the reality in that world where you have solved that problem, the key differentiator is human creativity. And that's going to be the key differentiator. So we're really focusing on how do we enable our creatives to leverage these technologies to come up with hundreds of creative ideas. In fact, what we've done is we've built a creative agent that's been trained on the genius of our creatives, how they think about coming up with ideas and things like that. We back tested it on briefs and RFPs, and it's able to come up with ideas that would have won Cannes Lions. So it's able to come up with the same ideas that humans came up with that won Cannes Lions. Now, that's not causing an existential threat to our creatives. What it's doing is enabling them to come up with even more creative ideas, because really that's going to be the differentiator for brands. So that's what we're focusing on. Of course, there's lots and lots of frictions that exist across our supply chain, but that is really something that we think is empowering our workforce.
That's great. And now you also talked about the agent verification. So if we do have an intoxicated graduate student using these agents, how do you ensure the verification that the agents do no harm or they don't go too rogue?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I see an agent as being an intoxicated graduate. We don't have any intoxicated graduates in
No.
WP, of course. But the agents themselves, AIs themselves, behave a little bit intoxicated graduates. 50% at least of what they come out with is confidently incorrect. Now, that said, they are getting smarter. They're graduating to like a master's level where they can do rudimentary reasoning, and maybe this year we'll have a PhD level. I think that over the coming years we'll have a postdoc level, and maybe eventually at the end of this decade we'll have a professor in our pocket. So I try to make sure that I'm building technology to track where the AI is going. But the reality is that people are deploying agents across their organization that are not fit for purpose. And sorry to geek out here, but there are two ways of testing. One is called non-functional verification. So is it hackable? Is it safe? Is it secure? Is it performant? Does it operate within the cost that we want? But there's a second type of verification called functional verification. Does this actually have the ability to do its job? And the way we think about this is testing it with 3 to 5 levels. I'll talk about 3. The first is testing for knowledge. So if I built an agent that could, let's say, that I want to do a media planning or project management, I will ask it, what's Scrum, what's Agile, what's a Gantt chart? The second question I want to ask are, do you have the skills to be able to do your job? Can you manipulate a Gantt chart? And don't just tell me, but show me that you can deal with ambiguous requirements. And then the third set of tests are, I'm now going to put you in complex, ambiguous scenarios with good actors, bad actors, risk reward trade-offs, curveballs. I'm going to see how you're going to operate a project in kind of real messy world type scenarios. So those are the 3 levels. And most organizations at the moment are just testing for knowledge, as opposed to testing for expertise. Now, there are a few more levels. One is testing for intelligence. These agents are interesting because they're not just static. They can adapt and change their behavior in production, unlike software, whereas once you've deployed it, it doesn't change its behavior. And then the final set of tests is actually testing for consciousness. And we can talk about that later if you want.
No, I was going there. Yeah, go ahead.
But I think, there's a massive opportunity to make sure that once you've deployed something you think, or if you're about to deploy something you think is going to do its job, how would I test that if it was a human being? Well, I'd make sure that human being has a track record and can prove that they have the skills, the capability to be able to do their job. And that's really what this new Verify AX solution is all about.
So you have Verify AX validating the agent's capabilities. And then you also have this concept of consciousness that you referred to. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Oh, well, so I've been very successful with, my exit to WPP and other exits. And I wanted to really sort of focus on some big questions that I think are facing humanity over the next several years. I'm interested in lots of questions, ranging from, what happens if we cure death, to how do we mitigate the impact of job losses. But one of the key questions for me is, well, 2. One is, what happens when people really start to attribute consciousness to these machines and build relationships with them? Some of those relationships are healthy. Some of them are not healthy. By the way, 60% of the population believe that large language models are currently conscious. So we need to come up with some sort of consensus, some sort of way of measuring whether these things are conscious or not, so we can help advise people on what type of relationships to build with them. But I do think there is a roadmap to build machines that are potentially conscious. So I don't believe that large language models actually have the capability of being conscious. I'm still thinking about that, but there's a whole field in computer science that tracks back to, me modeling bumblebee brains 22 years ago, called neuromorphic. So your brain does not need a nuclear power station to run. Your brain operates on the power of a light bulb. Large language models are horrendously energy efficient. They require lots of data to learn. They learn very slowly. They are crude representations of our brain. There are actually many innovations that are coming out of academia that are modeled on how biological brains work. And I think that some of those innovations will lead to incredibly adaptive, low latency, energy efficient models. In fact, Consium is actually investing in a number of academics around the world where we're helping them mature some of those neuromorphic technologies. We actually want to be a neuromorphic platform in the future. So not just testing AIs for consciousness, but enabling people to build AIs that might end up leading to consciousness. So I think that neuromorphics are a substrate that will allow us to potentially build machines that are conscious. Now, the big question is, should we build machines that are conscious. And the hypothesis that we're asking ourselves is, would a conscious superintelligence be safer for humanity than a zombie superintelligence? Arguably, large language models will become more and more capable, but they are zombies. They don't have empathy. They don't have an appreciation necessarily of things that are conscious. And that could be very harmful for humanity. So the hypothesis is that conscious superintelligence is better for us. And again, we still don't know whether that's true, which is why we need to test for it.
These are heavy topics. Daniel, you say 60% of citizens believe that these large language models do have consciousness. Do you believe that? Where do you fall on that?
I've actually written a book chapter recently where we've got a number of kind of leading thinkers in this space to give their perspective of machine consciousness. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to take the unambitious position of unifying the concepts of intelligence and consciousness. And if I'm honest with you, I think it's going to sound really arrogant, but I think I've got my head around what consciousness is now. And I've become less interested in that question. I've become more interested in the question of, what does it mean for something to suffer or to feel pain? Can a machine feel loneliness? Can it feel pain, hurt, sadness? That's what I'm really thinking about right now. And of course, in some respects, that's a prerequisite to being conscious. But that's the moral problem we have to solve for. It's the amount of suffering that we could create if we build machines that are conscious and not aware of it.
Yeah. And so as I had the privilege of attending Davos this year and some of the talks there, it was around what the risks to humanity are if an AI agent replaces a human as a partner, as a coworker even, and what happens there. I think the other point you made is that these LLMs are exceedingly energy hungry. We do not have the infrastructure to support their demands today. And yet one AI expert, a co-author of Attention Is All You Need, Leon Jones, said he thinks the next breakthrough, we're approaching it the wrong way. And it sounds like you're going down a different path as well. Am I interpreting this right?
Yeah, our brains don't propagate numbers, and they don't all light up once we've asked a question. They spike. Our neurons send spikes, and spikes actually contain much more information in a much denser sort of packet than propagating numbers. And so I'm very interested in a concept called spiking neural networks, which is a completely different methodology for how brains work. But there are many things that our brains do that are different to large language models that I think will inspire us to create much more energy efficient machines. I'm actually a little bit worried about how much money is going into this infrastructure and energy, because I think that over the coming years we might come up with new innovations that require significantly less.
That would be a really good thing. The other concept that you've written about and spoken about is really even how do we define AI and AGI? And I love that you described it as goal-directed adaptive behavior. Elaborate.
Yeah, it's not my definition, actually. It's from two guys, Steinberg and Salter, from the 1980s. And I did my master's on agent intelligence. Can you evolve intelligent behavior from a primordial soup? So rather than trying to teach or train or program intelligence machines, can you create the ingredients where intelligent behavior emerges? So I had to really lean into the question of what is intelligence, and that concept of adaptation crops up in Einstein and Darwin and many thinkers. So ultimately what you want to do is build systems that can make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, and adapt themselves so next time they make better decisions, which in some respects agents might start doing. The reality is, if I held what we do in industry to that definition of adaptive systems, I might controversially argue that nobody's doing AI, which is of course ridiculous because everybody's doing AI, but most systems in production are not adaptive. For me, that is the true paradigm of an AI system, something that can get better itself over time in a safe and responsible way. And again, I think agents are probably going to be the key candidates for adaptive systems. And I guess what's interesting about agents for me isn't agency. It's not just clicking on websites and making decisions. There's a concept many years ago called multi-agent reasoning, which is if I've got an agent over here that knows that Socrates is a man, and I've got another agent over here that knows that all men are mortal, by having them collaborate and communicate, they're able to both reason now that Socrates is mortal. They're able to create new knowledge that's never existed. And for me, that's the true power of agents, getting them to collaborate and communicate to be able to come up with new knowledge and actually check their own knowledge.
And so this ability for agents to collaborate brings us to a new shift in the industry. And if you can picture, many of our listeners here are chief data officers, chief data and AI officers, or aspiring ones. So maybe they're a data analyst where they have been doing this soul crushing work of developing dashboards their whole life. And yet you have made the statement that companies do not have insight problems. They have decision-making problems. And yet we keep focusing on giving more insights, giving more data. What's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I say that sort of semi-controversially. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were all told and telling people, go and build your data lake and put Tableau or some sort of analytics layer on top. And the idea was that you would extract insights from data, give those insights to human beings, and somehow it will lead to better decisions. If I'm honest with you, giving human beings better insights doesn't typically lead to better decisions. And that's because we're bounded. We're bounded by our ability to deal with certain types of information. We're bounded by our ability to solve certain types of problems. So relying on human beings or expecting human beings as being the pinnacle of intelligence, the ability to solve very complex problems, extract complex insights from data, I think is a misnomer. There are plenty of books that will convince you that humans are not that intelligent. So I always start out with the decision. What's the problem? And I know this sounds obvious, and we all know this, but what's the problem that we try to solve for? And then let's work backwards and ask ourselves, well, what insights or data do we need to be able to solve the problem? And then can I get access to that data to allow me to then solve that problem in a way that's driving value? And so working backwards from the problem to the data historically for me has been a success. And what you do then is you build your data and you build your insight layer over time, because that data and those insights can then be reusable across your supply chain. The example I use, for example, is let's say you wanted to build a solution that allocates your staff to jobs in a more effective way. Now, resource allocation is called an optimization problem. If I've got 5 people to allocate to 5 jobs, there are 120 possible solutions, 5 factorial solutions. If I've got 15 people to allocate to 15 jobs, there are a trillion solutions. So anything more than 7, don't use a human for. If you've got 60 people to allocate to 60 jobs, there are now more solutions than there are atoms in the universe. And so again, expecting a human to solve that problem, we're wasting our time. So start out by solving that problem and then ask yourself, what information, what insights do I need for the algorithm to make its decisions? Well, it needs to know about skills. It needs to know about availability. It needs to know about demand. Okay, then what data do I need to get access to understand people's skills? And so if I can create, for example, a skill model, I could use that for career development. I could use it for salary setting. I can use it for performance reviews. So always start with the problem, work backwards, and then try to build your data and your insights in a modular way. Again, what happens is that we get very excited about emerging technology. 10, 15 years ago, it was machine learning, and now it's generative AI. And what tends to happen is we apply those technologies to solving the wrong problems. We blame the technology. It's not the technology. It's human beings getting excited, solving the wrong problem. So always start with the problem and work backwards.
So I totally agree. Always start with the problem, the outcome that you're trying to solve for. Sometimes the data is not available. And sometimes if you have low AI literacy at the leadership level, you have some poor data team just trying to say, well, I know this would be useful if only we democratized it. The other thing that you have a concept of is now if these agents are communicating to each other, we used to think that part of supporting the insight process fostered by Daniel Kahneman is we need a story, and that stories tap into the emotional psyche of the person trying to make the decision. And yet if agents are not emotional, now it's what do we give the other agent? Break this down for us.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can give an example. I've never been asked this question before, so it's a good one. So in marketing now, human beings historically have been the buyer, and but what's happening now is that people are obviously talking to their personal agents. Most people use it for therapy, so they're telling it their hopes, their dreams, their desires. At some point, they will give their agent agency. They'll give it the ability to go and make purchasing decisions, or at least recommendations for what to buy. And arguably, that agent is going to be much more rational than a human being at being able to make decisions. It's going to go out there. It's going to be, testing things, determining what's true and what's not. So historically, we would tap into human biases, their emotion, et cetera, to go and kind of market to them. And the reality is that AIs are going to be much more rational. So brands, from a branding perspective, need to evidence the value of their product to the customer. So if I'm buying a jacket, I want to make sure that jacket keeps me warm and waterproof. So evidence that it can do that, but also evidence the value of the company to the world. So it's brand. And so Patagonia, for example, right? It's sustainable, it's locally sourced. Because what will happen is that agent will go out there and it'll test to see whether the product actually is valuable to me, but also whether that company or brand is actually aligned with my values around sustainability and all that kind of stuff. So and that's why I encourage now is that organizations need to be evidencing, proving the value of their wares. And that will also happen inside organizations. If you've got agents that are interacting, making decisions, we're going to be much more effective at evidencing what's true.
Yeah. And so does this lead to your concept of brand brains?
The goal of a brand brain actually is to create production grade content. We all know that large language models are very good at creating imagery, text, now sound and video. And the reality is that that's generic content. It's really good. It's cute, but it's not going to differentiate a business. So the goal of a brand brain in WPP is to be able to produce brand specific production grade content. If you go and ask, actually, let me geek out a second. There are 4 ways of making an AI smart. The first way, in this case, is asking it better questions, better prompting. Now, you're not going to be able to construct a prompt accurate enough for it to create a perfect ad. Like, imagine you're Ford. It's never ever seen that new Ford vehicle before. You're not going to be able to construct a prompt accurate enough for it to come up with a good ad. The second way is a process called ragging. It's very simple. You essentially give that intoxicated graduate your brand guidelines, some images of a new Ford vehicle, your company values, all that kind of stuff, and you ask the graduate to create an ad, and it will give you an ad that's 50% good. By the way, that can be built in minutes. Most of the companies out there that are trying to produce ads using AI are using that approach. It will give you about a 60% good answer. The third way of making a brain smart is taking that graduate and turning into an expert. And that actually takes months of tuning and training. And there are only some models you can train and tune. Just like a human being, it takes iteration, blood, sweat, tears, trial and error, mentorship. That process takes a long time. Actually, when we create a brand brain, we take an agentic approach. So the point here is that you build an expert at your brand guidelines, your written copy, your imagery, your tone of voice, your company values. Just like in the real world, you have all of these experts sitting around a table, collaborating and communicating to get to an answer greater than the sum of the parts. So the goal of a brand brain is to create brand specific production grade content, but you actually need to take an agentic approach to be able to do that extremely well.
Yeah. So a lot to think about how this whole process evolves for sure. One area that we have not touched on thoroughly is the AI safety, risk, and governance. And so some of this, Verify AX does some of this. Why do you think this topic is so urgent as agentic AI expands in 2026?
Broadly, when I deploy AI solutions into production, I ask myself 4 questions. One, is it tested? So can it actually do the job that it's meant to do? I think the reason why it's so important for me is that in some respects, regulation doesn't happen until things go wrong. Now, AI, just like automotive, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, anything that's had a kind of a material impact on humanity has been regulated, and it only gets regulated when things go wrong. So in some respects, when people start to deploy agents, they're going to realize it's going to go wrong, so they need to test it. But that going wrong will also hopefully spawn regulation, which I think is actually important to make sure that organizations are creating AI safely and responsibly. So for me, in some respects, I want to see AI going wrong because then people will then appreciate the need for testing. They'll appreciate the need for understanding how to deploy and scale software in organizations, but also hopefully it will help regulators understand what regulation needs to be put in to make sure that companies are deploying these technologies safely. And yeah, so I usually ask myself 4 questions. One of them, is it tested? The second one, is the intent appropriate? Is this the right thing to do? The third one are my algorithms explainable? The difference between software and AI is that AI tends to be opaque in terms of how it makes its decisions. And then the final question, which is a bit strange, is not what happens if my AI goes wrong. As engineers, when we build systems, we think about the failure points and we try to mitigate them. You now have to think about what happens if my AI goes very right. So for the first time ever, we can build systems that can massively overachieve their goal. And that can actually cause harm elsewhere in the supply chain. The classic example is if I build a machine and ask it to go and eradicate cancer, the easiest way of eradicating cancer is to eradicate human beings, right? So that's obviously the extreme, but that's what we might get to if we deploy incredibly capable AIs carelessly across our organizations without testing them.
Yeah. And so I think that's a good framework, Daniel. But you do surprise me a little bit that you want AI to almost go wrong so that the regulators realize. Perhaps I naively am hoping I would like the AI builders to design with safety. You laugh. Am I expecting too much here? Let's design it right from the beginning with do no harm.
I think that's fair. I think the thing is that these things are very exciting and people will use them and be curious about using them to try and help improve, inefficiencies and effectiveness, and that they will go wrong, but hopefully they'll go wrong in relatively minor ways rather than the major ways, and that will spawn organizations deploying the right governance, but also governments creating the right regulation. I think unfortunately, human beings, we don't tend to act until things go wrong, but hopefully we'll get the balance right.
Yes. And so one world region that is a little bit ahead on regulation, you mentioned transparency. So the EU now requires transparency from AI. I would still say transparency of what? Is it the weights? Is it the training data? How do you think this will play out?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And there is the rhetoric around the EU are putting in regulation that's slowing everybody down. I'm not quite sure really if it really is slowing everybody down. Maybe it's a little bit of a distraction because we're trying to figure out what is it they actually mean. But what's been really nice from working both inside WPP and other organizations is that despite having regulation, people have been thinking about using these systems safely and responsibly, at least, the people that I work with. So now I'm not saying that you shouldn't have regulation. I think we do need regulation. There was a time where the EU was saying we need to regulate AI, which I think is bonkers. I don't, again, what does that mean? What you need to do is you need to think about what are the risks in deploying this technology? What are the potential problems that this can cause? And then think about regulating the risks. So what are the risks around technological unemployment? Our economies might not be able to rebalance. So how do we then mitigate those risks? Maybe we need 4-day working week. Maybe we need, universal basic income. So think about the consequences of AI going wrong and think about regulating the risks rather than the technology.
Yeah, I think that's a great model. Daniel, we could go on and on here. I'm going to shift to a fun, lighthearted lightning round. Okay. What do you enjoy doing outside of work when you're not immersed in AI?
Oh, I feel like I work all the time and I love work. I've got 2 little girls that I spend a lot of time arguing with. And then, focusing on your health, I think is becoming, as you get older, like me, you need to think about your health. So actually, using AI, using data to try to understand, your body and your health and all that kind of stuff is actually quite fun for me.
Oh, so then
why I'm wearing all of these different devices.
Yes. Okay, let's see. Hold it up. People watch on YouTube. I was like, are you into the wearables? Looks like you've got 2.
I think I've got like 6 sleep devices.
I'm researching them cautiously.
Yeah.
What about a book or a podcast that has influenced your thinking?
I mean, I've actually kicked off a few podcasts. I'm really obviously interested in consciousness right now. London Futurists is great. There's also a podcast that's created by Prism, which is actually a non-profit that I created called the Partnership for Research into Sentient Machines, and they're really leaning into consciousness. And I really like a book by an academic called Mark Solms called Hidden Spring, which I think is one of the seminal books on machine consciousness.
Oh, awesome. We'll link to those in the show notes. And then you can choose your final question depending on your mood in the moment. Either what are you most grateful for, maybe beyond the obvious of health and family, or an accomplishment from the last week that you are particularly proud of?
Oh, good grief. What was the first question again?
What are you grateful for?
I am grateful for being naturally curious. I'm not very employable, and I'm not very good at being told what to do because I have to understand everything before I can accept it. So that's very frustrating for most people, if I'm honest. But being curious and just trying to understand things so I can make good decisions, I think is one of my only superpowers.
Oh, that's great. Well, Daniel, we are grateful that you've been on the Data Chief podcast and that you are curious to challenge our thinking.
Thank you.